chances are that George Floyd didn't die because of racism, but police brutality, which is the real problem that needs fixing. And it happens to white people too. It just doesn't appear on the news, and that's why I think the media is being manipulated against white people. Many of you have probably seen this disgusting piece of propaganda. This picture is shared to say that black people are getting killed like George Floyd, innocent black people, while white people are treated with respect and dignity even if they're murderers. And that's just simply not true, and I can prove it. The first link you have in the description box is about a case of an innocent white guy that got killed in a hotel by a white cop while begging for his life and trying to obey orders, crying and afraid. And he never committed a crime in his life. But do you know his name? It's Daniel Shaver. No. And I have other similar cases below too. And they show that the problem is police brutality, not racism. So next time you see this picture, just know that the person posting it is trying to manipulate you into believing a false narrative. Think of this. Even if George Floyd's case was due to racism, that would just be a bad apple. It doesn't mean that America or that the police are racist against black people. This year alone, 19 unarmed white people got killed by cops and only 9 black ones. That doesn't align with what Black Lives Matter is propagating. Still, on average, more black people get killed. But when you consider that 1, they're also more likely to get killed by black officers, and 2, black people commit more crimes, you can explain it without resorting to racism. So, if you want to save black lives, raise black people out of poverty, make them drop the hood culture, the gangster admiration, and the lack of respect for authority. Poverty and integration are the problems, driving the deaths of black people, not racism. So let me say my boldest statement of the video, and know that I'm not generalizing. I'm aware that there are many exceptions, but I'm talking about the current trend I see. I think that African Americans are one of the most spoiled and entitled groups in the world at the moment. I think that they fail to recognize their privileged status in the world. Just being North American is like winning the lottery. Even if they're not as well off as white Americans, they're still really good, objectively. I think that in the 60s, they had legitimate grievances that the police was actually racist. But the amazing historical fact that I see is that they didn't play the victim card back then. Martin Luther King did not see black people as perpetual victims of racism. He knew that black people could and have achieved very much by themselves without the help of their skin color. So African Americans can complain more now than back then. I think it's time to drop our focus on race and stop seeing black people as victims. Of course, there is still racism, not just against blacks, but about everyone. And unfortunately, they will always exist because there are people willing to believe in dumb ideas. We still have flat earthers, for God's sake. The problem isn't that racist people, it's systematic racism. And currently, there's no systematic racism against blacks in America. But there is against whites, things like affirmative action, by which black people are allowed to steal jobs from whites, or systematic racism against Asians, for example. Some universities have openly and shamelessly adopted racist policies towards them, requiring Asians to have higher grades than the rest of the students to get accepted. We should be marching down the streets for those things, which are clear and easily fixable cases of racism. I think that African Americans need to stop going back to the 400 years of slavery and bringing back past oppression. At some point, you gotta let the past go. And now it's clearly overdue. We had enough already. White people have also suffered immensely historically, and by their race too. I mean, the biggest racist crime in history happened to white people, Jews, in the Holocaust. And it wasn't about black people, it was about 2 sub-races of white people. Or what about the Irish farmers starving to death while being forced to give away their food to England? They weren't considered a different race back then. Or redheads being killed by the Spanish Inquisition because their hair reminded them of the devil. What about slavery in Spain, which wasn't racially based? They enslaved their own white people too, a tradition that came from the Roman Empire. They enslaved themselves. In Northern Europeans, they conquered everything. When the Moors conquered Southern Europe for 800 years, they oppressed white people greatly as well. And like I said, now African Americans are one of the best groups in the world. They're using smartphones that are bought cheaply by exploiting Asians working in buildings that have nets because they commit suicide so often. Every group has been oppressed, and there's no reason to keep going back in history. And people should be ashamed of using the phrase check your privilege or white privilege. No student of history would ever dare to say that. And what matters is not past suffering. What matters is that America isn't racist now. And it hasn't been racist for decades. Even if black people are now poorer because of past racism, which I think is the case, there's nothing holding them back anymore. No single racist law. So let's work together, united. Let's raise people out of poverty, blacks and whites alike. Let's fight elitism, police brutality, injustice. That's what Martin Luther King wanted. Blacks and whites and Asians and every race working together towards a common goal, making the world a better place. The dream that race will have no power or be a concern politically any longer. That's our goal. Brotherhood between all of us. And here's my most powerful argument. The problem is that in many cases we never truly know if a crime is inspired by racism or not. But think of this. Every racist cop that commits a racist crime always, 100% of the times, has to use police brutality. So by fighting police brutality together, united, we effectively demolish racist crimes. But on the other hand, if we confuse cases of police brutality with racism, people will still get killed because the real issue is unaddressed. And we would be more divided, more focused on race, and we will be fueling both black racist people, the false narrative that they want, and also giving neo-Nazis, which are a problem, especially in Europe, they're rising in numbers, the excuse that they want to hate black people. So you see, we have to be really careful when saying someone or something is racist. We need to bend over backwards to make sure that it's a clear case. It's better to have a racist guy sentenced by another crime than an innocent man accused of racism. So even though I admit that most people in Black Lives Matter have good intentions, the movement is racist. It's manipulating the media, it's dividing us further, and this is the very opposite of what we need. Let's get together, stop riots, let's stand up to entitlement, false narratives, and manipulation, and let's make the world a better place for all of us. The time for racial concerns of any kind is a thing of the past.